Pastor Rob again. We are at Election Day +1. Our election was yesterday, and truthfully, as I'm recording this a few days before Election Day, I have no idea who won. I have no idea, who knows, we might be in for what happened. You remember 24 years ago when in 2000, the election, we all thought it would be over the next day, and it wasn't over until, 6 weeks later. Even the last election, the returns were still coming in 5 or 6 days later. So it's possible we're in that situation today. I want to ask the question now about what next? Where do we go from here as a Christian citizen? Some people respond to an election when it doesn't go the way they want with cynicism and despair. They say things like, well, I'm moving to Canada, or I'm moving to some other country, or he's not my president, she's not my president. I think, I'm always startled, or maybe that's not the right word. It's always kind of thought-provoking to me how little the New Testament really makes reference to the political climate, political leadership of the day. It's there. There are mentions of political leadership, but it's pretty minimal. Now, I don't want to make too much of that, but it seems that the New Testament church just kind of assumes that, okay, you've got political leadership, they're going to do their thing, but as Christians, our primary focus is on how do we live as a community of God's people in this world. There's not cynicism or despair or hopelessness about the state of world leadership, national leadership. There's just sort of a commitment to focus on living as a community of God's people. And so I guess maybe that's a place to start. I want to encourage you in that. God's kingdom is not going to come in, and it's not going to be ushered in through political means. It's just not. So you don't need to fall for that despair, hopelessness. Certainly don't fall for the triumphalism. But here's what you can do. First of all, pray for our new leaders, whoever they are. We're told that Paul writes that in 1 Timothy, Romans as well, where he talks about that. Now that's far more shocking than we'd realize, because the government, when Paul calls us to pray for our leaders, he was talking about leaders who are executing Christians, who are persecuting Christians. If he can call for the church to pray for those leaders, then by all means we can pray for leaders that we just disagree with. You absolutely should be doing that. The second thing I think that I would encourage you is to rest in the sovereignty of God. I guarantee you, I don't know who won the election. I guarantee you that the kingdom of God will not be ushered in because this person has been elected. The country may flourish or not under their leadership, but the kingdom of God will not come or not come based on this leader. We can, as Christians, we should, one of the witnesses that we have, I think, is that we are resting confidently in the sovereignty of God. If you are not a Christian and you do not have that hope, it sort of makes sense that you'd be panicking or overly optimistic and triumphalistic, because your hope is ultimately based on something to fix the problems of the world. As a Christian, if your hope is properly placed, your witness to the world around us should be confident trust in the sovereignty of God. God has accomplished his will through, he's used dictators and tyrants throughout history to accomplish his will, and he's used great statesmen and great leaders to accomplish his will. You can wake up tomorrow, if you didn't wake up today this way, you can wake up absolutely rock solid assured that King Jesus remains firmly on the throne. You can rest absolutely assured that nothing that happened yesterday caught him off guard. So rest in that assurance, rest in that, and remind yourself that, preach that to yourself. And then finally, there's probably more things, but I'm going to stop here. Engage the political process. I am not thinking and saying in any of these things that I've put out in the last few days that Christians should be passive citizens. We shouldn't be. one of the ways that we can participate and we could live as citizens of God's kingdom is through our involvement in the world. And we advocate for biblical principles. We do it through the political process. I hope you did vote. You can speak out as a thoughtful critic about policies that you see and don't like. You can be a critic of culture in a way that's constructive and helpful. You can advocate for policies that you think work best to promote the values of justice and peace in the world. You can volunteer your time. There's a whole ton of things that we can and should be doing to see to seek the good and the flourishing of society. I want to end with this. It's one of my favorite passages in the Old Testament, from Jeremiah chapter 29, where God essentially says to his people, he says, you need to be seeking the good of the city, because if it flourishes, you will flourish. In other words, he says, your thriving as a people is tied to the thriving of your city. So work for the good of your city. That is a far more shocking statement than we realize, because that the people of Israel at that time were in captivity. They were people of Judah. They were in captivity, and they'd been just taken away, and their own land had been pillaged and plundered by these evil Babylonians. And now here they are, and they're living in exile. They're living in a foreign land. It's so different. The customs and the values and the beliefs and the morals and so on are so different from what they're used to. And yet God says, I want you to work for the peace and flourishing of this city. That I think applies to us today. I think we ought to be working for the flourishing of our own communities. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. I'm not going to tell you all the ways you can do it. You got to think of that yourself. But ultimately, post-election, as a citizen of God's kingdom, that's most important. That's how you're going to seek his kingdom. Thanks for watching. I hope these few videos that I've done the last few days have been instructive and helpful. And we give thanks to God that Jesus is firmly on the throne, ruling over all things until the day that he returns. Thanks for watching.